Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out. I'm going to call this meeting of the Tourist Rooming House Committee to order. First thing is roll call.
Ginny Chaybeck,
Present.
Phil Neese,
Present.
Tweed Schuman, Stacy Hessel, Chris Rusk, Gary Nathan,
Yes.
Matt Dale,
Present.
Cheryl Treeland, Chris Vaselli, Martin Hanson,
Here.
Ryan Carey, Laura Rusk. You have a quorum.
Thank you. And let's rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Can I get certification of compliance with open meetings law?
This meeting has been noticed to the public and news media as required by section 19.84 of the Wisconsin statutes.
Thank you. Now we're on to public comments. So the first one I have is Linda Zilmer.
Linda Zilmer, resident of the village of Birchwood and Edgewater property owner. And I appreciate the good start that this committee is getting off to. And when you discuss what your scope of work is going to be, I hope you don't make it too limited and continue to bring in people who are involved with the different aspects of tourist rooming houses, such as the sanitary providers and things like that. One question I had asked earlier was, how is the community, the people, the public, how are we supposed to communicate with this committee? And there's also, I think, maybe lack of information out there about how people should be reporting the issues they have with tourist rooming houses. So for either a next agenda item or in the interim, if a press release could be drafted and given to the newspapers to let people know about the work that you're doing. And first of all, how to find and then report issues, Health and Human Services, and I don't know if Matt can explain, but there is buried on the website, independent party reporting system, and probably those results should come forward, but I have a feeling the public doesn't know that much about them. So if the press release could talk about what you're looking to accomplish, how to report, and then also how to communicate with this committee. And so please take this opportunity, because it probably won't come up again for a long time, to really address all the issues. Thank you.
Anyone else from the audience?
I would like to comment.
1 minute, we have someone else in the room and then we'll go online. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, my name is Lee Sedlacek, and my husband and I have a property on Northern Lights Road. And I watched the previous meeting by Zoom and had some points that I thought I wanted to share with the committee, because this is a widespread concern in Michigan, Wisconsin, multiple counties are having issues. In a previous life, I taught nursing, so anytime I do a presentation, I have handouts. Some of the comments that came forth from the last meeting talked about in 2018 that Sawyer County had 394 tourist rooming houses, licensed and unlicensed. And by 2023, this number had increased to 563. So in 5 short years, the rental capacity increased by 40%. This was driven by demand. This demand, I believe, could not have been met by hotels, motels, and resorts. And so the tourist rooming houses provided an opportunity to bring a lot of tourism dollars to Sawyer County that I think might have been lost to the local economy. And of course, I don't know the exact figures. Short-term rentals are also able to absorb seasonal fluctuation more easily than a hotel that has a lot of staff members that they're trying to keep on hand. Many resorts are only 3 seasons, and so they don't really help with winter tourism. So within the short-term rental business, we understand that we'll be empty in the off-season, and we work that into our business plan. However, like any business, supply can outpace demand. And according to Airbnb, overall across the country, bookings are quite high, but individual bookings are down. And I think this represents the increase that we have seen. And so I think those players that were trying to get into the market because it was highly profitable may not stay in the market. The first couple of years that we had our property in Northern Lights, we were booked 29 out of 31 days in the summertime. This summer, we're booked half. And it's not that less people are coming, it's that there's more opportunity, and so therefore it's less profitable. So I think some of these businesses will be going away. At the last meeting, the housing crisis was mentioned, and we're very involved in the cable community, and housing crisis is pretty bad there. Trying to find rentals for people who want to work in the area is pretty difficult. And I know there's been some criticism that short-term rentals are part of the problem for that. I'd like to know the actual figures as to how many permanent residences have been converted into short-term rentals to see exactly if that is a significant problem or just an easy target. In our case, we bought a property that had been a family cabin, and we turned it into a vacation rental, so it was not a permanent residence. We also have a property in Iron County that was not a permanent residence. So I think it would be useful to know the exact number. We have problem properties. I don't see any problem, and I mean, obviously there's problems with crowding and parking and noise, but I think most owners are focused on maintaining their property in good condition and following the rules. So the question that I have for the committee is that any regulation that you develop, that it be balanced and appropriate, and that we not penalize the people that are good citizens that are trying to operate their business within the rules. So one question related to septic and sewer. We have a one-bedroom cabin. We advertise it for 5. I have yet to see 5 adults there. What we see are families with 2 or 3 children. So if we went with the 3 per bedroom rule that was mentioned at the last time, I wouldn't be able to rent that to a family of 5, and they would have to go to a 2-bedroom rental. That increases the cost quite a bit and might have a pretty negative impact on tourism in the community. My suggestions would be to look to enforcement of existing rules related to noise, parking, fire code, trespassing, because I think many times these are not enforced. I would also encourage you to communicate with the different platforms like Airbnb and VRBO, because they are responsive. I would also encourage that troublesome properties perhaps have their license suspended. So the goal should be to regulate the bad party without punishing the conscientious owner working to have a successful business that also adds to the local economy. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Okay, do we have people online that would like to speak? Please identify yourself, your name and address.
Yep. So my name is Brittany Gerdahl. I have a property on Hildreth Road in the Round Lake Township. I am just kind of wanting to piggyback on what Lee said. I believe many of the operators within Sawyer County are smaller mom and pop owners. We're not like big corporations. We don't have tons of properties. We might have 1 or 2. And most of us are very interested in caring about our properties, making sure that we don't have over occupancy happening, making sure that the property is kept in good condition, as Lee would say. And also to make sure that our communities are happy with us and not disgruntled that we have loud, obnoxious guests all the time. So what I wanted to say is I agree. I do think that regulations can be good, rules can be good if they're done properly. And we do want good regulations. I don't know that what's being proposed is actually going to help with the occupancy problem. And why I say that is, as a host, I have a separate rental agreement that everyone that comes into my home, at least one responsible party, the booker usually, is signing, saying that they have 8 guests or 6 guests or however many guests that they're bringing within my occupancy that I've listed. And there's been a couple of occasions where people show up with double that or 5 extra guests. And as a host, I am frustrated by that. I have a legal document with this booking party that says that they are bringing this many guests and then they show up with extras. As a host and as a member of the community, I would like to be able to go to some proper authority and say, hey, this isn't okay with me. I would like some sort of repercussion for these guests. And I would like to be able to do that without my neighbors necessarily having to call and complain or bring the issue themselves. And granted, this is not happening on a regular basis. We've only had this happen once or twice, but I would like to see the regulations maybe protecting and helping us as hosts do our jobs better, rather than, like Lee was saying, penalizing hosts for when it does happen. I know from personal experience, when you have to go and get a septic redone, there are long waiting lists. And so for some of the companies within Sawyer County, it's 2 years, it's 1.5 years. So finding, if we do have a septic regulation that's imposed, finding the ability to basically hold the carrying costs for this property for 1.5 years is not going to be practical for a lot of people. So maybe that needs to also be addressed. And I see you have Chris in the meeting today, so maybe she can talk to that a little bit.
Thank you, Brittany. Is anybody else online that would like to speak?
Hi, my name is Mike Nyland. Hi, I own a property in
Your
Sawyer
address,
County.
please.
Yep, I own a property in Sawyer County on True North Lane. And again, just as another short-term rental property owner, I think I'm going to reflect a little bit of what Lee and Brittany have already said. And I'm certainly not speaking for the entirety of the host community, rather as, an individual property owner. But from my perspective, I'm really happy to see that a committee has been formed. I think as hosts, we understand that regulation is necessary, and there's a balance between the supporting the community and avoiding some of these issues and allowing us to run our businesses well. So, I do want to say we're here to work with the committee on solutions that, make sense for everybody and allow this industry to continue to thrive. I think one of the other host speakers said is that, there is an enormous benefit to the community, that our industry is providing. I think the economic forum, Sawyer County Economic Forum, spoke to some of those numbers just around tourist income and supporting a reduction in taxes for residents and that sort of thing. So I think with that in mind, we just want to make sure that any regulation this committee puts forward is keeping that in mind and helping both resolve some of the issues that were brought up while allowing this industry to continue to grow. And so, I have some specific comments on the last committee meeting that I watched over Zoom, but I'll just kind of keep my comments brief to one point really, and that's I think a lot of the discussion.
You have 1 minute.
So far, yep, I'll wrap up briefly here. A lot of the discussion so far is focused on occupancy as a driver of some of the issues that were put forward. And as a host, I'd like to see a little bit more discussion on defining that problem. I think Lee mentioned, there are some properties that may be more problem properties and others that are doing their very best to, meet regulations and that sort of thing. So I'd like to just see a little bit more discussion around, what are the issues and how could we define those better? Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yes, this is Amy and John Stalter, and we have 3 properties. We are host to 3 properties in Sawyer County. And my husband and I, we did go ahead and listen to the last meeting, the Zoom call. And in fact, if it's possible, it would be great to be able to be part of the agenda next time, just because I feel as though, as others have expressed, that I'm not sure the committee truly understands the community benefits and the economic boost that we actually bring to the area, and the fact that it's a win-win-win when we all work together, because government guests and us as hosts all have very positive outcomes from short-term rentals. But I feel it's very unfortunate that short-term rental owners and hosts are put in a pool with those that are not acting properly and are not good hosts. I feel as though, as was mentioned before, that should really be the focus, because otherwise all you do is give us a bad rap when in fact we're actually benefiting the community, not only from an investment perspective, but culturally, we're revitalizing our properties. I mean, there's just a number of benefits that, I would really like to step through and really like to focus on the fact that unless we all work together, we're not going to be able to positively contribute. And so I don't know if maybe it would help becoming a part of the committee or being given the opportunity to do so. But I think we all really need to work together. And I do have some ideas about what this particular committee could really focus on. And it's more than just the quote that I guess bothered me from the last meeting was the fact that somebody brought up that's on the committee that this is a quote backdoor approach to regulating occupancy, unquote. And if that truly is the case, that this is a backdoor to regulate short-term rentals, I don't feel that's fair. And mainly because we have neighbors who do not offer their properties to, as a host, but instead it's their cabin. And talk about overloading a property. I mean, we don't do that. And this is a neighbor of ours that is just offering it to family and friends. And, so I don't feel like, I guess, the short-term rental community should be singled out. Again, I have some other ideas on what this committee could focus on. Granted, overcapacity should be one of them. I absolutely agree. How we go about doing that, though, I guess is what I'm questioning. And so,
Thank you,
yeah.
Amy.
You're welcome.
And thank you to everyone who spoke out today. This is all good information that we're going to keep track of. This is the early phase, right, in this committee, and we've got a long way to go. So all the contributions are appreciated.
And I would just mention that, those that are wishing to potentially, reach out for a specific agenda topic, those emails can be sent to me. This is Jay Kozlowski, the Sawyer County Zoning Administrator. You can find my contact information on the Sawyer County Zoning website. I would then forward that information onto the chair, and we could then further discuss to have that as a specific agenda item moving forward. So thank you.
Okay, I would like to consider a motion to approve the minutes from the previous meeting.
Second.
Motion by Cheryl, second by Phil. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. All right. So we're going to get into some discussion here amongst the committee on scope. The reason that I wanted to start with this is so that we understand as a group what we're here to accomplish and when we're done. This could be something that takes us down a lot of different paths. And I think that some of the comments were evidence of that. So we should try to understand what we're here to do and whether that is based on the spectrum of things that we've discussed in the first meeting, managing occupancy limits, based on septic capacity, or a full-blown ordinance like some other towns and counties have done. I think I just would like to have that discussion now. And also I would like to start with Jay, Eric, and Matt on what their expectations are for the committee.
Yeah, as far as, kind of determining as, the scope of this committee. Now, I mean, ultimately it was, formed by the County Board of Supervisors, where, you know, there's a need and a necessity out there to further look into TRHs, whether it's to have additional regulations, whether it's not to have additional regulations. But we hear the pros and cons of both sides. And it's really this committee that's tasked with taking in that information and then providing that recommendation back to the either a committee of jurisdiction or even up to the County Board of Supervisors as to this is what we decided through the work and input of the public, and here are our recommendations to you. That's how I would see this committee perform. I would see that that is your scope that you should be focusing on. As to which way you go, that's what we're here to determine.
Eric.
I guess my input for this committee's scope would be in relation to the septic system sizing. Currently, I've reached out to DSPS and DATCAP, two state agencies involved in licensing and regulation of these tourist rooming houses and septic systems. In Chapter 72, there are two sections in that code for DATCAP that specifically explain two options for occupancy. One is sleeping rooms based on cubic feet if it's a municipal treatment, like a city sewer. The other is based on two state chapters in SPS 382 and 383 that discuss options of either residential sizing of 2-person per bedroom or commercial sizing of these tourist rooming houses. I think in Sawyer County right now, through the years, we don't really have that as a means of regulating occupancy. And I use analogies to septic systems with automobiles. And I guess my analogy here would be that Sawyer County is the Audubon without speed limit signs. And I would like to see this committee come up with some means of posting speed limit signs. Are there going to be individuals exceeding that speed limit? Yes, but at least we have a sign to establish occupancy, I guess, based on septics.
I'm Matt McKay, Sawyer County Health and Human Services. With my role with tourist rooming houses, I, license a lot of these places. I get to do a lot of the inspections on these properties and get to know the homeowners pretty well. And that's one of the great things about my position. One of the harder spots for me in this role is when I do get complaints. And what I'm hoping that we get out of this ad hoc committee is means to have tools for me to address these issues. My biggest nightmare is the week after 4th of July weekend or any of the major holidays, I come back and then I got to look at my phone and I got messages. Now, granted, it's not always that way, but when I get those complaints, those phone calls, I got to deal with those. And they're hard because some of these things are civil issues that I can't address. They're out of my purview. It's not my role. Things that tie to licensing, those things I can deal with, whether it's, unsafe situations or whatever it might be, or some even parking I can kind of deal with a little bit. But I need tools to be able to make this run and go smoothly. And so when people call and I say I can't do anything, really right now I can't for a lot of situations. And what I hope that we get out of this is that way, when we get certain issues, that I can either guide them down the right way to get resolved, or I can help assist get resolved in these situations. And so I appreciate everybody's time and being a part of this. And that's where I'm hoping we can get focus on and get some tools to use when we're all said and done, whatever ends up being decided. Thank you.
Okay, committee. What are our thoughts on scope?
Use your microphone, please. Sorry, I should have told you that before. There's a little button in the middle. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I just have a question for Matt McKay. Can you give us some examples of the issues that you do not have the tools to deal with?
So like. Yeah, so when we get complaints about trespassing, those come to me because they are situations that derive from a rental situation. And so those that I have to guide to the sheriff's department or I mean, I guide the individual to, go to the sheriff. Fireworks, yes, we do have a fireworks ordinance. Though that is something that could be better addressed too, and how we can, once we get a complaint from neighbors to rental properties that they're lighting off fireworks. Other situation, parking issues, we say like this last winter, we had a lot of snow and driveways were tight. So get phone calls of people parking snowmobile trailers in easement right of ways and stuff like that. So again, I can't, those aren't in, as you know, in my rules as agent of the state to be able to necessarily say that facility is in violation, or I can't document that as a complaint in that facility's file because it's not necessarily a code that we enforce. And so noise complaints overall, those are situations just overall loud, too many people, let's say at a campfire or whatnot. Like I said, trespassing. So yeah, there's a lot of different issues, but again, when they come in, I just wanted to have better means to be able to address some of these situations.
Matt, question, and excuse my ignorance, but when you make an inspection, an issue for the state as an agent, do you go and see how big the bedrooms are, how many bedrooms there are there? Because according to state statute, the count a bedroom, it has to, what you provided is. How do you do that, or?
So
is that part of it?
Yeah, so I mean, we don't necessarily record in our database how many bedrooms there are. When we look at it, it's just basically, is the room set up so that we're not exceeding the amount of cubic footage per person in that room.
And you do look at that though. When you issue for the state, you actually look at the bedroom to see that it has that many CS, whatever you call it.
Cubic footage. Yeah, so I mean, you can kind of size up a room without having to measure it.
Yeah,
Otherwise we spend twice as much time doing these inspections, but yeah, I mean, you can size up a room and just see whether or not.
So if you looked at a room that was relatively 10 by 10 and 7 feet high, which would be 800 or so, whatever CFM, you would consider that a bedroom, and of which ways the standards that's being set, that would allow 2 people. Is that correct? Is that a correct statement?
Well, and that's where it's hard for maybe because, for 2 adults, yes, that would be accurate, but then it changes for children under the age of 12. Sure. And so, oftentimes it could be set up with 2 sets of bunk beds, so 4 single beds in there. I mean, are those always being occupied by kids under the age of 12? You don't know.
It seems to me, we keep coming back to capacity. I mean, we've been charged with identifying the issues or problems associated with vacation rentals. The capacity may or may not. I mean, what's the problem associated with the capacity exactly? Are we seeing failing septic systems due to the rentals? Perhaps you could speak to this, Eric.
I'm not sure if we want to be proactive or reactive with that. I can't say there's a direct correlation, but when we have studies done decades ago through our universities that establish numbers for occupancy and septic system sizing, it's hard to differ from their results. So I guess the swamp program back in the 70s, 80s had determined this, and maybe new research can prove that septic systems can handle 20 people instead of 2-person per bedroom. I highly doubt it. I'm not sure if we're going to see a quick failure rate or exponentially failing. You know, are we seeing this growth of 600 tourist rooming houses that are unlimited in occupancy potentially? Are we going to see a failure in a year or two? Maybe not. Maybe in 5 years, we're going to see a demand on our plumbers and installers. And there's 4 different types of failure that occur to determine a failed septic. Just because it's ponded or tasked or overused may not be a failed septic, but its longevity will greatly be reduced.
How many septic system failures are we seeing per year associated with vacation rentals?
I have not done that research. I don't know.
Could I ask Matt a question? When, because you represent people, you're the agent and so forth. When they come to you, I come to you with my house and you say, well, how many people, we're going to advertise this as 10 people, 8, 14. How do you determine that, I guess? Or you don't, you just whatever, for information.
How do we assess the capacity? Is that the
Yeah.
question?
Yeah, if you look on the website, it'll say 3 bedrooms, 10 people or whatever of an individual site. So just,
Mhm.
how do
Well,
you-
we follow the current lodging code that specifies the capacities based on cubic footage.
That's one of them. There are 2 of them that you can refer to, right?
What's the other?
It needs to abide by state SPS chapter 382 and 383 if it's not on a municipal treatment plant, which most of them in Sawyer County are not.
I just was wondering how it's currently established.
So I guess for clarification, so as Eric pointed out, there is 2 ways to address occupancy as far as sizing goes. And what I had mentioned earlier is using the cubic footage is really ideally for those systems that are on municipal, like Eric said. When we were handed this program from the state, there wasn't in the past that correlation between the state agents working with county agents to really see what the capacity could be for based on septic systems. It was basically kind of done as I explained. It was done by cubic footage, and that's what we continued on doing. So that's what we're trying to hear to figure out what is the right way for us to be to determine the occupancy limits.
So, one of the main things we talked about in our last meeting was overuse of the facilities based on the septic systems as being a way to address occupancy and all of the other things that come with occupancy. It seems reasonable that this may be a way that we can actually give Matt some of the tools that he needs in the long run to do his job. There will most likely, in my mind, also need to be some education that we do as far as, a lot of people, when they come in to these rentals, they don't know the lake rules. They don't know the fireworks rules, things like that we could address, but that's a later agenda item. And I don't want to get too far down a different path right now. As far as our scope goes for this particular committee. So I wanted to talk a little bit about other ordinances. Most recently, the town of Rice Lake in June signed in an ordinance on tourist rooming houses. I don't know, has anybody had a chance to look at that? Or any other community, county, town ordinances?
Of the three that I reviewed, which was Barron County, I think it was Barron, I don't remember right now, and Rice Lake, the problem with the city ordinance is it is far beyond anything that I believe we'd be interested in. And it's a whole nother world, really, being a town than it is, and they're on city sewers and so forth. There was a few items in there that maybe you could scope off to stick in somewhere, but actually, where we're at, I think is, from what I was looking at everything, from the restrictions, everything is going, we're about as far as we can go in looking at trying to figure out, and I made the statement last time, behavioral issues are not our scope. That's the sheriff. And it's you know, in the last committee we had, we tried to stick in a few, and that really was not reasonable. I mean, it really wasn't. But anyway, I don't know. I guess I would offer out that maybe we ought to look at, you can, two things can be true, and you can use two things to make the standard. And one can be the size of the, you know, how many rooms, the size of the rooms, how many is this safely, supposedly by the ST, whatever it is, ATCP is, well, how many people are allowed? And I'm sorry, how many people are allowed, and also and correlate that back to also, well, how many people are allowed with the septic? So, and whichever of the two is smaller, that's what we should be doing. That would be what I'd throw on the table. But at least for discussion going down, but we need to hear them from an expert in a little bit. So she's pumped me for years. So, right, Chris? Okay, I'm sorry.
No, thank you.
Jenny?
Yeah.
If I could just go back to scope for a second.
That's what we're supposed to be talking about.
Yeah, I am a bit confused still in terms of what Matt talked about, a couple examples of complaints that he gets. It would be interesting to me to maybe go back, I don't know, some period of time and try and categorize those complaints in terms of frequency, number, locations, and then take that data and look at what problems the county might have authority to assist in regulating or solving in there, and some that are not, that are other bodies or other agencies. From the comments that we received from the public earlier in the meeting here, there seems to be a big basket of things that we're trying to deal with. And I'm an engineer by nature. I need to organize things in a spreadsheet or something in order to fully understand where they're going. So in terms of what comes out of this committee and tools that the county can use to administer short-term rentals, I would hope that we could kind of further define the problem and what the limits of that problem are before we go too far down the road. Thank you.
Matt?
So like I was mentioning earlier, just some of the complications I have, documenting and noting the various types of complaints. That's been a struggle because I have what I can enforce through the agent program, but then I also have our ordinance that we have, and then there's the other stuff that I can't do anything about. And so when we get complaints, there's those individuals that just kind of want to vent and want me to know, like an FYI kind of thing. There are some that want us to kind of, I guess, note it, but then how do I note it? Because I can only note the stuff that pertains to the agent program, and some may or may not fall in our purview for our ordinances. So where do I put that complaint? Then there's those complaints that deal with our statutes that I enforce for agent programs. So those do get put in to the agent database. But some we ask, so we're trying to also improve our ways of documenting this stuff as well, because we get the various types. And so trying to engage, to figure out the severity of these complaints and what we need to do to respond. Is it something that just, so you just need to listen to somebody? Is it something that we need to respond to? Is it, and then what is the urgency of that? Is it, could I just make a phone call to the owner operator and try to resolve this that way? Say, example, Matt, hey, we got a complaint about one of your properties. Could you just, check into this and make sure this is ongoing kind of thing? Okay, thanks. Or is it something that I need to go make a personal visit to? So there's just so many different, so getting the information that you're looking for may be a little more complicated, but we can certainly try to get what we can. But yeah, that's where I need these tools, how best to handle these situations.
Yeah, and I kind of expected that answer, because some of these things that you don't have current authority to deal with, maybe those ought to be in the discussion of what this committee is dealing with, to give you those tools. And maybe some of them, we just have to tell the complainant that's a civil issue or that's a law enforcement issue. But again, trying to find which basket these complaints go into. Thanks.
Chair, I just had a quick question. I know I'm going to sound simple here, but when you build a house, you have to have your septic to capacity of who you say is going to reside at your house, correct?
Correct.
So when you build, do you have to say, I'm going to use this as a short-term rental? And then are those regulations changed?
No.
So why are we not just following the guidelines of when you build a home, how many people can be in that?
Right. And so we are, I guess, semi having that discussion, and as per the kind of information we brought up last month, as part of the occupancy is whether it's as a residential design, which is the 2-person per bedroom, as per how the sewer system was sized. Sewer systems are sized per number of bedrooms, but there's also that appendix within 383 that if it's going as a commercial sizing, and the at least initial state documentation realized that a TRH or a short-term rental would have less occupancy than a year-round living structure, because there is some downtime potentially, that they would limit it then to 3 occupants per bedroom per the sewer system sizing. So that's kind of the two things that Eric and I have looked at, and that's one of the focuses that we want to have for this committee, is if we are to have additional means of regulation, do we want to look at that commercial type of sizing for TRHs, or we could go straight to residential sizing? So on a 2-bedroom sewer system, regardless of how many bedrooms you actually have in that structure, you'd be limited to 4 occupants.
But so are these sites changed from residential to commercial?
Right. That's where we would have a document that would be drafted.
I mean, in zoning, are the zoning, so when they decide to do a short-term rental, then
As of right now, no.
so then why would they ever be considered commercial and not
Right.
residential? Okay.
And that's where right.
Yep.
So.
Yeah.
And
I think that's part of what we want to get to for our next meeting as well. Brian?
Hi. So I just wanted to chime in with the complaints that Matt gets. I get those too. So my name is Brian DeVries. I'm in the land records office. So I get phone calls on, neighbor trespass sort of things. Not a whole lot necessarily, but I've got an idea, and I was curious if the council or committee wanted to hear that.
Sure.
That's where we're at right now. So we're talking about the septic, the sanitary systems. And that's important for the county at large, for, outside of that house and those neighbors. But a lot of these issues are down to that house and their very immediate neighbors, as far as, people who are making these phone calls. They're directly adjacent to these properties. And I kind of had this idea. Now, I work with property boundaries and the recorded documents that control these properties. I'm not sure how many short-term rentals are down private roads, but when you have a private road, you've got a road that's on people's personal, private property. It may not be at the edge of their property. It may be going through the middle of their property. Where people's properties start and end might not be very apparent. And I think that's kind of some of the issues that people are having, is in non-typical property issues that are pretty common around our lakes. You know, you don't have a east and a west road with driveways going perpendicular to that every so many feet. You know, you've got a driveway that's just kind of coming through a property and ending at a property. I thought, what if we were to make some sort of requirement for driveway maintenance permits or driveway maintenance agreements? So on private roads, a lot of times lenders are wanting driveway maintenance agreements to, you know, to have a mortgage on a property. And what that comes down to is the property owners on that road coming up with a plan for maintenance, you know, winter, you know, plowing maintenance and summer road, you know, condition maintenance. I think some people on private roads don't want to see the increased traffic. And I don't know if everybody's having a conversation about what a short-term rentals increased traffic is doing for everyone else who has to use this private road. So what if we were, you know, had them do a driveway maintenance agreement? That would force everybody to talk to each other and come to a consensus. We would have, that would be a recorded document, and Matt McKay could refer to that as far as, you know, when somebody calls and says this is happening in and around my property, we could look at that document and see what was agreed upon. You know, that could cover parking and, you know, how people expect people to come and go from these properties. Also, I wonder how many people have good easement language on their property to get there. You know, not everybody has a good easement to get from the town road to their property. So maybe that would, you know, if we had people come up with a driveway maintenance agreement, that may bring to light, you know, how people are accessing their property and get everything above board. That way, again, Matt has tools to say, well, you know, they're getting to their property legally per this document. You know, everything's happening correctly per this document or not. And then that also isn't us creating like a restriction that is like, you know, we're imposing restrictions upon your property. We're not. A driveway maintenance agreement wouldn't be a restriction. It's a common thing that people should have on a private road. So this wouldn't be, you know, this wouldn't be required for people on town roads, but it could be something that could be applied to, you know, these private roads.
And
Thank you.
I
can. I'm just going back to when Linda addressed us earlier. I think some of these things, and from what I'm hearing from Matt, are just, if you come in on a Monday morning and these things happened on a Friday and the people just stewed about it all weekend because they didn't know who to communicate the problem to. And granted, on Monday, Matt can tell them, you should have called the sheriff about this, or you should have called the DNR if it was a water issue, or you should have done this or done that. It needs to be a well-written press release on because they are so common now, that people can refer to. And if you know that you live next to one and you know that you're irritated much of the time, here's my list. It's on the refrigerator, and that is who I should contact to get some action on this. You know, if it's fireworks at midnight or whatever, obviously Matt's not going to be able to do anything about that on Monday morning. They should call the sheriff's department. Anyway, that were my thoughts.
Laura, I think that's a very important point. I really do. I think, as I stated earlier, education has got to be a big part of this. We can regulate a lot of things, and a lot of things already are regulated. My concern is that we go down a path of trying to create something that just adds more regulation where it isn't needed. And I think what I'd like to do right now is hear from our legal counsel who's online to see if there's anything that she thinks we should incorporate or avoid.
Yes.
Rebecca?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me attend today. This is short-term rentals and tourist rooming houses are quite a hot topic across the state. I work quite a bit with the Wisconsin Counties Association.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Oh, yes. I think I had my microphone covered. Is that better? Hopefully better. Okay, hopefully you can hear me better. Yeah, hot topics across the state. We work quite a bit with Wisconsin Counties Association, and I commend Sawyer County for putting this committee together to take a look at these issues, because we do have some municipalities in the state who have adopted these types of ordinances. One of the first that was adopted was in Polk County and is already subject to litigation. The Wisconsin Realtors Association filed a lawsuit. I believe it was in March of this year. So that is in the process of challenging the laws that we do have in place. So from a legal standpoint, we have statutes on point to give us definition on what the county can and can't do. Counties as a governmental body can only do what we have statutory authority to do. So in that respect, counties are different than towns, villages, and cities based on how a county is created under the statute. So when we're looking at other ordinances, perhaps as samples, or other types of municipal regulation, we have to be cognizant of the fact that the county may not be able to do what a town, city, or village can do in another ordinance. So everything we do has to go back to make sure it passes statutory muster. And again, that's something that sometimes will trip up counties because we look at another ordinance. Well, this is what the town did. Well, okay, that's fine, but the town did that, but it's not necessarily something the county may be able to do. Another important legal component of this whole discussion is when you're looking at the framework of regulation and where that regulation is going to live, so to speak, in your ordinances. There are some counties who are taking a zoning approach. There are some counties who are taking essentially an environmental health approach. And so those are, discussions that I'm sure this committee will have. And I've talked with, Jay and Matt and Eric and Mr. Alvarado about these issues already. And, we have some ideas of, again, where that regulation is going to live and what's going to work the best in Sawyer County. And then finally, again, because I do work with WCA quite a bit, Atolis is actually doing a model ordinance with WCA right now. So that is in the works literally as we speak. And so it's a great opportunity to kind of blend the work of this committee, but then also utilize the work that WCA is doing with that model ordinance. Now, even though it's a model ordinance, Sawyer County may decide it wants to do something different. Certainly Sawyer County has that capability. But again, it's pretty cool that WCA is doing this at the same time as this ad hoc committee has been joined together, so we can again utilize the benefits of WCA's work. One final note, just something for the committee to consider as you look at potential challenges that any ordinance may confront from a legal standpoint. Always keep in mind that even if the county may be able to regulate something, really think about whether it wants to. And so the point that made me think of this is somebody had previously commented on the rental agreements between owners and renters, and to what extent can the county help enforce those. It's a great idea. And I think it's something that can be talked about. But from a legal standpoint, we want to make sure that the county is staying in its legal lane, and that the ordinances are not doing something that is creating additional legal risk for the county. Obviously, I'm legal counsel for the county, so that's what I'm going to be advising on and giving the committee those points to consider. So I'm happy to answer any questions, either from a general standpoint or a specific standpoint. And with that, I'll wrap my intro up.
I guess I have a quick one. I mean, what are things from the illegal analysis that we should absolutely stay away from?
Okay, great question. So 660104 is the most definitive statute that we have outgoing, and even though it falls under the general municipality statute, it does apply to counties. Counties cannot prohibit any sort of rental of statutorily defined residential dwellings if rented for 7 consecutive days or longer. So obviously, short-term rental, most, at least in my experience, most are 7 days or less. But keep in mind there's restrictions on items more than 7 days. We can't limit the number of days if it is rented for 29 consecutive days or more. And the reason for that statutory prohibition is, frankly, some municipalities, including a county, got sort of cute in terms of trying to regulate short-term rentals by limiting the number of days in a total year period, to such extent that it virtually made short-term rentals almost impossible. So that, again, as the committee looks at options of putting things together and being creative, which can be a very good thing, you don't want to be creative to the extent that it undermines the intent of the statute. Room tax, that's something that other municipalities can look at. We as the county cannot do that. So those are right out of the gate. Those are 3 items under Chapter 66 that we cannot do. And then, if there's other specifics that would conflict with ATCP 72, 73, obviously we can't do those either, but I'm not too concerned about those because we already have those in place, and Matt is already utilizing those restrictions within the context of how the county is operating the program now.
Rebecca, Phil
Mhm.
Needs.
Hi, Phil.
Hi, long time no see. Is there anything that we've discussed this specifically back to occupancy, whether it's done through room size or using the septic, whether it's done through zoning, which might be different, whether it's in the sanitation ordinance or it's done through the agent or whatever that we've talked about? That is, I hate to go, we've twice before on ad hoc committees, we've got all the way to the county board and we found out we couldn't do it. It was a lot of wasted time and effort. And so anyway, is there anything we have discussed here that raises the hair on the back of your head a little bit there?
No, from a general standpoint, no. In terms of the, utilizing that, the sewer sizing as an option, I understand that there may be concerns about creative regulation, or I think the term used before was backdoor regulation. I don't look at it that way. I don't look at it as a sneaky way. I look at it as a creative option that from a legal standpoint is appropriate. Obviously it's up to the committee and then the policymakers to determine whether that's how the county is going to go forward. But from a legal standpoint, there is nothing that prohibits the use of that regulatory mechanism. I know that DSPS has perhaps not looked at it favorably. We, as part of counsel for WCA have talked to Dispus many times that if you don't like something, thank you very much for your comments, but then do something about it. You can't enforce law the way you want it to be if the admin code allows it to be a certain way. So that's been an ongoing discussion, and it's a factor, you know, that you can keep on the back burner, you know, as you're talking about that regulatory mechanism. What DSPS's position is. The only thing that gives me a little bit of pause, again, is the extent to which the county would be involved in contractual relationships between owners and renters. That, I think, is a slippery slope that could be that could create risk for the county. You know, is there a place for county involvement in those contractual relationships? Perhaps. And certainly it's something that I would encourage the committee to talk about. But again, the extent to which the county is involved in those types of relationships, the county might be biting off more than it wants to chew. So that's the only thing that I've heard, you know, within the course of the meeting today that's given me some legal pause.
Thank you. Your 2 minutes are up.
I have a question. WCA is working on a model ordinance.
Yep.
How far along is that, and what is the expected arrival date?
Great questions. I would say we're in a good point of the process in that it has been discussed with different stakeholder groups. So we know what would be a non-starter from, like, let's say WRA's perspective, the entity that filed suit against Polk County. So we know it has to be palatable for all stakeholders. So we've already had those discussions, which puts us further along into the process. In terms of actual drafting, Andy Phillips and I are working on the drafting literally right now. And I would say we're probably, from a drafting standpoint, we're probably 40% in. One of the challenges we're facing, though, is there's an element of zoning regulation within the model in the baseline that we're starting from. And I have concerns about utilizing zoning as a mechanism to regulate short-term rentals. So that's kind of creating a bump, in the drafting process. In terms of expected date or expected timeline, I really can't say for sure. I know for other model ordinances that we've done for WCA, it's a few months. So I think from a timing standpoint, it will work well with what this committee is doing. And so again, using the benefits of the WCA work and pulling it into this committee, even before, let's say, that model ordinance is promulgated officially by WCA, it's something that I can bring forward.
Okay, I'd like to kind of wrap up this discussion. I think it's been a very good one up to this point, and it's a tough one. It's very difficult for us, I think, at this point in the game to try and say this is exactly what we want to accomplish, but we're getting there. So first of all, one more thing I hasn't been brought up that I definitely want to bring up is it's a passion of mine, and that is we have got to take care of the water. The water quality in this county is one reason why people come here in the first place. And it's a resource that is underserved because we don't have general septic, city septic systems. We only have septic systems that are individually owned. So from that standpoint, I would very much like to see this committee accomplish making some sort of speed limit sign regarding septic systems as a goal. So is there any other discussion on this topic before I make a sort of a wrap up? Yeah.
So with Brian's example with the driveways and easements and stuff like that, It's interesting that he used that example because just in the last 2 weeks, I've had 2 phone calls with those types of scenarios. And maybe you have gotten them first and sent them down to me. I don't know, but yeah, those are okay. That type of situation, I get the phone call and they have this problem or complaint. I talk them through that. I can't necessarily do anything about that. Is that something that I document? Is that something I need to write up? These are the types of scenarios that, yes, they're concerns, they're complaints, but some are more serious than others. Where do I put that call, that complaint? Do I write that down? I'm leaning towards now writing, trying to keep notes of that kind of stuff more often. But again, we're pulled in so many directions that sometimes you just don't always get to do those. Maybe not as serious issues don't always get recorded or put on paper, I guess. So anyways, I just wanted to share that, I guess.
Okay. I just want to wrap this up. So to kind of take everything and put it into one statement from what I've heard so far. I believe we're saying as a committee that our goal should be to come up with a recommendation for the county board based on the framework of regulation slash licensing based on county jurisdictions of zoning, environmental systems, health and human services, land records, and education. Does that kind of wrap up what we just said? Anybody have any concerns about that? Would anyone like to make a motion?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Phil and a second by Laura. Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, committee. We at least have a start now. All right, the next item is a very, very important one. And this is Chris is here from Northwest Sanitary to talk to us about their experience in the field with tourist rooming houses and septic maintenance.
Hi, thank you. My name is Chris. My husband and I own Northwest Sanitary. This is the beginning of our 18th season servicing systems in the county. Didn't used to be that many rooming houses. They weren't very common when we first started. But in the last probably 6 to 8 years, those numbers have changed, getting a lot of them. The issues differ depending on the systems. We haven't seen septic failures yet. You had mentioned or asked about that. We see septics being stressed, but our customers depend on us to kind of guide them. And with our rooming houses, we have those septic system ones where we're servicing them manually. That way the system's getting a break. We're seeing the systems, they're abused. They're like trash cans. People come from city settings. They don't understand you don't flush everything, like paper towels and wet wipes, to mention a few things. But the annual servicing helps to maintain those systems and maybe prolong their lives. The other issue, though, with holding tanks, I think the holding tanks is a bigger issue because that's where we can see the volume of water actually being used because it's captured and there until we take it. And the volumes are astronomical. People coming on vacation are not using less than full-time residents. They're using a lot more. It's like a resource that they're not going to run out of. And they're on vacation, they're having fun. The issue with the holding tanks, and I would maybe with permitting, they need to have working alarms. Otherwise we're going to have big issues. And it happens where all of a sudden they can't flush or water's overflowing and it goes downhill. And we all know what's downhill, the next body of water, or that's where it gets. So making sure, and maybe annually, making sure those alarms are working. I don't know if your permitting takes place annually or if it's good for a number of years, the process when you're licensing these places, but that's really, I think, vital. One of our online people had mentioned how we can help them. And one of the things that we see the problems with holding tanks also is the silencing of the alarms. Homeowners or renters are there, they silence that alarm when it goes off, and then they don't tell anyone. So we don't know to go pump it. The homeowner or the renter, the host doesn't know that it's full. until it's catastrophic. It's backing up, it's overflowing, and everybody's mad. And it always happens on a Saturday and Sunday. So, so I know there's some new technology coming out, wireless remote alarms where it can text the owner. So whether that gets silence in the house wouldn't matter, but they would get the notification right away. Some of those systems are set up, they can text 4 people, so they could text the pumper, whoever their service provider is. That would solve a lot of issues with holding tanks. And then the volume of water is just overwhelming, but we're dealing with it and getting rid of it. But I don't know if you have any questions. Those are,
Would you, would be twice, you'd think, or just, would it be twice what a resident ordinarily would
oh
use?
yeah, I mean, we have families that have 3,000 gallon holding tanks and they can go 8 weeks, 12 weeks. These rentals are going weekly.
Really?
The big rentals, the 25 head, those are 5,000 gallons a week, and they're filling them. They're filling them every week. So maybe some more education on conservation of our resources when you come to stay would be good.
When we talked on the phone, you mentioned the other problem with holding tanks being that water doesn't go back into the water table.
Right. With a septic, your drain field's on site, the water goes back into the soil and percolates down and eventually is back in the water table. With holding tanks, it's not. We have to take it away. And sometimes we're hauling it 30 to 40 miles away to get rid of it, depending on the weather. So you've removed the resource completely. So I would encourage the county not to permit maybe lots of holding tanks unless it's the system of last resort. If they can have septics, it's better. The homeowner, they don't like the price tag up front. But in the long run, they're happy not to see us as often. So,
Chris, about how many holding tanks are out there on
Eric might know better.
I don't know the number of, or the system type for tourist rooming houses. We've started a spreadsheet to kind of answer some of these questions. The 23 years I've been with the county, the average percentage of holding tanks of all system types is about 20%.
I think that's gone up though, hasn't it?
It's
No,
been pretty steady at
Is it?
20% of all systems.
Different parts of the county are
One
I have more, but
one trend I am seeing is plumbers coming in and changing to a non-holding tank system for that very reason. The cost of frequent pumping and doing soil treatment on site rather than doing a holding tank. That's a trend that I am seeing increasing, is the holding tanks converted to non-holding tank systems.
Is the reason that the holding tank was put in the first place because of the soil test or limitations of area? I mean, in that case, you can't really do anything else, right?
We're getting creative with design and sand filters and technology that allow land use for on-site treatment that didn't occur previously. And I think the biggest reason is just the cost of and frequency of pumping, and try to treat that wastewater on site rather than haul it away.
well, the holding tanks were also cheaper to install initially. And if you were only building a hunting cabin, it made sense. But now those are being converted to full-time homes or rental homes. And now they're getting a lot of water use. So there's been some changes in the way they're using systems and properties.
Chris, could you comment on the frequency of the holding tank overflows and trend?
Well, the silenced alarm trend where we have to get there really fast, we're half a dozen a week.
Wow.
Overflows, not as common, but they happen, but we that's why we hurry, so they don't, you hustle, but the septics, the backing up of septics is a bigger issue because it's a much more concentrated product. And if people are using those systems and not servicing them enough, filters are clogging and everything's coming back. And that's a bigger problem, I think.
Thank you.
Now, is that problem to the amount of water or actually what they're putting down?
I think that's what they're putting down. That's why we're having to encourage those properties to service annually so we can get them cleaned out, keep the head of those filters clogging.
Is that a recommendation, do you think then, that
We recommend it to
Annual?
our clients. I don't know if you can make it a regulation, but I think it would be a good suggestion as people are getting licensed with their properties, that they should consider that and to monitor it closely.
In that 383, you probably couldn't require it though,
Yeah.
because the state would have every 3 years unless you were somehow able to determine that the tank was 1/3 volume sludge.
Right.
But no, I definitely like the recommendation
Yeah,
of
just
annual
a
maintenance for
suggestion
TRHs.
them, that'd be good.
And Chris, there is a fine line between annual pumping and the 3-year.
Mhm.
Each tank is going to be different.
Right.
And this is non-holding tanks. We're talking about septic
No,
tanks.
this is for septic tanks and for the larger rooming houses that, as we've worked with them over the years, we know that they're getting really heavy use. I mean, we're just familiar with those properties.
But the fine line is to have an activated tank that's operating correctly or one that's pumped annually and not given a chance to activate and have that fats, oils and greases layer, the clear layer, and then the sludge layer. If it's pumped too frequently, you may not have that separation that occurs.
You may not, you're right, but if it's got such a heavy crust layer that your filter can't do its job, now you're backing up, so. It is, you just have to work with your service provider to figure that out, but don't ignore it. And don't wait 3 years on those rooming houses.
Chris, is there
understand.
enough of you guys to go around?
I think there are. I think there are. We're staying busy, but I'm not turning people away, so.
Okay.
I have a comment. So you're saying that these septic systems are being heavily loaded. No, I understand that while they're being occupied, but most of these vacation rentals are only occupied for 3 to 4 months out of the year.
We have a lot of full-time ones. We have a lot of full-time because they rent to snowmobilers all winter. There's
Well,
quite a few.
We manage 40 plus vacation rentals in the area, and none of ours are.
You don't do no, well, we have a lot of full-time rentals. But like I said, it's got to be on a case-by-case basis. Maybe they don't need that kind of service, and then others do. And those 3 months of the year, if it's big parties, those systems are in pretty rough shape. Have you been on site when it's been serviced and seen what's going on?
Oh,
Because,
yeah, well,
you know,
yeah, we post signs, and everything as to
Yeah.
what they're not supposed to flush. We even have discussions with them on the phone prior to arrival.
Yeah.
I know it can be an issue, but I think it's important, and I think Cheryl can, speak to this as well, to look at your occupancy, over the course of the year. I mean, these septic systems are getting a break.
But it-
When you
what-
go out, Chris, how do you know whether it's a rental or a residential? property?
When the people are scheduling, I'm familiar with the customers and what the property is, where there's a lot of communication that goes on. So I'm usually aware. They identify that.
Stacy?
Question for Eric. Are commercial buildings, are they regulated to pump every year or every 3 years like residential?
It's in the management plan. It depends on the system type and what the designer / plumber designed the septic to be, but I would say 95+% are on that 3-year cycle, even commercial and residential.
Okay.
And just to clarify, the code to design septic systems unfortunately does not take into account occasional occupancy in residential or commercial. It's gallons per day for design. There are residences, non-tourist rooming house facilities that are only used seasonally as well. Unfortunately, we can't design for the unknown days per year scenario.
Changes the overslot too.
I can tell you, we put in, how many years ago now, a big system that pumps everything back totally north of the resort, the main resort. And it was a year they normally see improvements every year there. And everyone came, what'd you do this year? We're like, it's all buried in the ground. Because it was back then, it was about, I don't know, $500,000-$600,000 for it. And you guys can attest to the systems we have out there. But we pump them every year, because once you have one do it once and the mess you have, you will pump them every year. You don't care. You just pump them every year and you do it just to be safe rather than sorry. And it just pays off because you don't know what they're, I mean, we get something that's plugged in the toilet, they go over there and we've got a toothbrush in the toilet. We got, we had pork chop bones one time in the toilet that was plugging up and had them out there, and there was a pork chop bone in there. So you don't know what they're, we're not worried about feminine products, but they're sending pork chop bones down the toilet and stuff like that. So I mean, you're just safe rather than sorry. It might be a recommendation to the tourist rooming houses. If we can't do it by regulation, just strongly suggest with your occupancy, that's especially depending on what you got there, that there's a strong suggestion to pump it just so they aren't sorry. Because you don't know what these people are doing.
No, you don't. I didn't realize that you can clean the refrigerator and flush it all, but that's what they do. Yeah, that happens.
Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Chris? All right, that's really good information. So the next item on the agenda is options for sewer system sizing, and this is for discussion. Basically, we wanted to take a look at the chart that Eric provided on this and discuss, as Stacy mentioned earlier, the differences between residential and commercial and what might be the most appropriate way to go here. It's discussion only. We're not going to ask for a decision on this today. We're going to look to do that in our next meeting. So any thoughts?
And Eric and I were discussing this again this week. So there's really kind of the two, you could potentially look at three different options, but any type of hybrid approach to the table that Eric created as far as, this residential sizing or as a commercial TRH sizing. Other counties we've heard they're using some type of hybrid, which is number of bedrooms plus 2 occupants. Yet that is nowhere in code. So when you look at kind of a legal aspect, see if something is sound and solid, I would definitely recommend not going to any type of hybrid approach of that +2, because there's no place to put the hat for something like that. But as far as developing a speed limit, specifically for conventional systems, you really kind of have those two different options. For residential sizing, it's 2 persons per bedroom. So if there is a 2-bedroom sewer system on site, the number of occupants that it would be limited to, number of guests that could be there would be for 4. As per a TRH sizing, it would be for 3 individuals per room as size. So on a 2-bedroom sewer system, that could occupy 6 occupants. So those are kind of the 2 breakdowns that we've had there for non-holding tanks. And the discussion that Eric and I had this week in conjunction with Chris's testimony here today, we don't necessarily need to go that route for holding tanks. I don't know if that slide made it in there or not for the holding tank one. Yeah, so this one here, again, is kind of the breakdown between residential sizing and TRH sizing. So even if this committee was to say, well, because holding tanks and the sheer volume of water that's being used and the, over pumping and stress that's putting on those pumpers, even if we were to decide to go TRH or commercial sizing for non-holding tanks, we could still use residential sizing for holding tanks, which again is a means of occupancy for TRHs. Unless Eric wants to add anything else to that, that's kind of some of the information that we've prepared as departmental staff, and really up to this committee to, I guess, engage in those talking points and really think about what type of potential speed limits that we want to recommend.
Eric?
And just to add to that, this applies only to those properties that do not have a centralized system, a wastewater treatment plant. I think based on DATCAP's code, chapter 72, if it's on city sewer, you would size occupancy based on cubic feet per room or sleeping area. If it is a septic system, as I read indicated in code, it would have to meet the options that you see on these charts. The one of 2 options, the residential or commercial. So just to clarify that.
Go ahead, Cheryl.
Just a question, just our clarification, basically. So we're doing tourist rooming houses, so this would pick up all of your resorts out there also then, correct?
Resorts, I believe, were sized, we have sanitary permits in the past that have been sized for resorts, typically designed as bedrooms, 2 per bedroom. So if you have a resort cabin, that's a 2-bedroom resort cabin, or was 20 years ago, it was sized for 4-person occupancy. Whether or not additions were made and the permit was updated for that, I would say 99% of all sanitary permits that come in for resorts, private homes, residences are all bedroom sizing, not the commercial sizing.
So your resorts that have condoed out, because there's a ton of them out there.
Mhm.
Okay, on Nelson Lake, I think about 5 or 6 years ago, it lost 12 resorts we lost out there in 1 year.
The
All right,
condos.
so you have all of those are condoed out there. They're just small, little old, typically little fishing cabins.
Mhm.
And I guess the question would be, a lot of those are also being rented now as tourist rooming houses. You know, what category are they in?
That's to
That
be
would be my
determined. And
clarification we'd have to have.
yeah, we have a start on a spreadsheet to determine, like Matt can maybe give an update on that too. We started this winter and I know it's not complete, but we have a start on it. And I think before continuing, we'd like to hear from this committee as to whether or not we are going to go with a 2 per bedroom, 3 per bedroom, or keep it as is. I think are 3 options. I think that's priority for this committee to move forward. I'd like to see, there are many other ideas and issues to discuss, but I think to start our education process and information would be how to move forward with occupancy. It seems to be a hot topic. I don't know if we can do it in this meeting or next meeting or half a year, but I know Matt likes some guidance and our zoning department would like to help Matt. So
I guess to get this moving in a direction, I would make a motion that, well, no, you can't. I make a motion that we use this for discussion.
Okay.
That's where I'm going. That this would be the starting point of any discussion. And so then we can go forward.
Agreed. We don't really need a motion for that, though.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
I don't
fine.
think so.
Well, he kept asking for it.
Okay, so, just want to put in my 2 cents on this. I kind of agree with Stacy's point in that most of these are residences that were turned into rentals. They're houses, they're in residential zones. They should be considered residential. I can't figure out any way to fit that mentally into anything else.
I have a question, if I may ask Gary, Nathan. When you sell a home that's been a short-term rental, when you sell that, do you have to disclose like this was a short-term rental for 3 years? It was not
No.
just a residential?
No, you don't have to disclose.
So the
that.
buyer
The
doesn't know,
Seller doesn't have to disclose that.
so the buyer does not know that it was a short-term rental?
Oh, they may. I mean, there's so much information available that likely they do, but it's not something the seller would have to disclose.
So if a short-term rental were to have to be rezoned as commercial versus residential, would that hurt or help?
That's another.
I know, but
How often have we seen a rezone? It is. No, not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Home occupation is
necessarily.
allowed within a residential zone district.
Yeah, sorry.
It depends on the use of the business too.
And I think I'll make a comment. I'm not so sure that most of the rentals were residential homes. Matt, you could probably speak more to that, but I think more of what I see are probably cabins, condo cabins are probably the ones that I see that are mostly been turned into rentals. There are a number of homes too, but even cabins, what people call their cabins, their 3,900 square foot cabin. Those have been turned into short-term rentals. So I'm not so sure that many residential homes have been, if that makes sense. In other words, somebody that lived there for 20 years and now it's been turned into a short-term rental. So
You see more than I do, but the ones on my lake are.
Yeah,
homes.
well, I see a lot, but I'm just saying, yeah, that's from my perspective.
Yeah.
I think the data, we'd have to, we'll someday have that spreadsheet, won't we? We'll probably know. But
we're definitely picking up, the resort cabins that have been condo. There's a fair amount of those. But the far majority were originally built as a residential home.
Yeah, and I would concur that. Yeah, we got the condoing off of old resorts and stuff like that. That's, there's a good number of those, but I would say a good majority of those that are, say, in an urban setting in the town of Hayward, a lot of them are residential lake homes for the most part.
Going back to, why we even try to find, other options, as presented by Eric for this, residential sizing and, TRH commercial sizing, was really just kind of back to the analogy is right now it's kind of like the Autobahn. And if we go to residential sizing, it's a 25-mile-per-hour speed limit. If we go to commercial sizing, then it's maybe like a 45, 55-mile-per-hour speed limit. And that would be my only concern is that you're going to probably end up, if you go to residential sizing, you're taking a lot of these places that were, renting or at least advertising sleeps 15, sleeps 20, sleeps a dozen, and they're going to be cut at the knees back down to 4, 6. So just keep that in mind. That's a big drop. And there'll be fall down from that. It's to what extent, that's for legal and others to figure out, but just keep that in mind when looking into it.
Yeah, sure.
I think if you did that, though, you still look at your other problems we have, which are parking, garbage, noise, fireworks. I think you're taking care of a lot of your other problems that your big crowds. I'm from a family of 10. I know how loud we can be and how obnoxious we can be.
Not you personally.
But in that case, you may crash the market as well and no longer bring in, because if a home goes from, say, housing 8.
Excuse me, this discussion is for the committee only. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Martin.
Yeah, continuing the analogy of the speed limit Autobahn that was started earlier. I fall on the side of preferring the residential side of this. If we go down this road, when we design a bridge on a freeway, we design it for a certain truck. And just because a different truck wants to drive across that bridge, we don't necessarily change the weight limit of that bridge. And in the spirit of protecting the environment, water quality, water table, I think we should adhere to what those structures were originally designed for, which was typically a cabin or a residence. So my personal preference would be on the residential side. I fully realize the economic impact that may have, but these were not designed as commercial operations. And if they are going to be commercial operations, maybe we do go down a different path and treat them as commercial operations in a different manner.
Brian?
So bringing in around the commercial discussion brings it back to easements. I probably had the same phone call, Matt, and where somebody asked, is this a commercial easement or a residential easement? Well, the easement language is for ingress and egress for like, you and so forth, some legalese. So, when you've got a private road and people use this private road to access their property, can you have, are short-term renters customers? And can you, per your recorded document, does your easement handle, your customers coming down this easement? I don't know. I guess I'd be curious to say what are the legal ramifications of that, because the language is very brief. So what does that mean?
I do like that analogy a lot. I think we should probably pull some examples of that, because I've seen other easement language that allows for assignees. Is a tourist rooming house occupant and an assignee, leasee. So I mean, it's very specific as to how that maintenance agreement is written. And I was going to bring that up as items for kind of future agenda items as you and I get together and kind of look through some of those road maintenance agreements and specifically kind of say, okay, well, this one says it might be allowed for PRHs. This one says only owners, heirs, and successors, doesn't say assignees or leasees. But yeah, it's really more of a legal analysis at that point. But
Right. And per these scenarios, just to say another situation that is happening is, then do the short-term renters get to walk their dog down the road?
Right.
It's what
Yeah.
we're hearing. So
Exactly. Yeah, thank you. Gary, did you want to add anything? Okay,
I have a
all right.
question
Rebecca? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Matt?
for Jay. So if we were to, proceed with, say, the commercial standards, how would you administer that?
Yeah, so Eric and I have discussed that. We would end up creating a document in the form of something that would have to be notarized by the property owner. And it would change the sizing from residential sizing to commercial sizing. In conjunction with a valid sanitary permit, we would then record that information on the deed. That would then be shared with the health department for their licensing as to say, okay, you have a 3-bedroom sewer system that was installed to it. You're now switching it to commercial sizing. So you're allowed to occupy or to advertise rental of 9 individuals. That document, again, would be linked to the deed, and zoning and health department would work in conjunction with the issuance of a license to say, yes, that occupant or that property owner came in, signed and recorded the document, and now they have the ability to do commercial sizing for 9 individuals. That's how our perfect world would kind of work on something like that.
What about all existing licensed facilities?
As part of your annual renewal for license, that's when it would come up.
Okay, well, that, that would definitely suppress the tourist rooming house, business in the county. I mean, is that what we're here to do? Are we, looking at this from a public health standpoint and protecting the public health, protecting the lakes, whatever? Or are we just trying to suppress, the business because there's just so much, compared to 3 years ago? It's been a huge increase in usage. If you want to control the usage of the lakes and that, that should have been done years ago with zoning, and instead of having requiring 100 feet of frontage to build on, it should have been more like 200 or 300 feet. Then we probably wouldn't have had this issue right now.
I like my analogies, but my size 12 foot doesn't fit in a size 6 shoe.
Right, I don't think this is about suppression. It's about the infrastructure and what the infrastructure was put in here to support. And we have to, we have to live within what we've got.
But I haven't, we've been in the business, our property management's been in the business for 29 years, and we rarely see a problem with the septic, overloading. So, I'm having problems accepting that there is a problem.
Okay, well, we're going to wrap this discussion up. Rebecca, are you still there?
Yes. Very quick comment on the rezoning issue. I will warn the committee if there's a recommendation to either create a separate zoning designation for short-term rentals, or if there is a desire to rezone from residential to commercial. We do have specific case law on those points, and those can become very complex legal questions. So if the committee goes down that road of discussing it from a rezoning standpoint, I'll obviously flag those legal issues for you. And then also there is a component of the 2023 budget, that is the affordable housing component, that some of you may be familiar with. It does have an impact on zoning regulations, if you will, if you're doing rezoning from residential to commercial. That is a 50,000 foot high level summary of what that bill entails. But just to give you all a heads up that there may be some impact from that new legislation on this discussion if we're going to be talking about zoning issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Then very good points. Okay, so like I said, we're going to wrap up this discussion. I would like the committee to consider talking with folks between now and the next meeting so that when we come back together, the next meeting, we can have a concise discussion and hopefully get some direction on this going forward. Okay, the next item is future agenda items. Jay, did you want to recommend some things?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of listed some of them here. I do think at some point, and maybe we don't want to discuss it yet, we may want to see what other type of model ordinance WCA comes up with before we make a motion, and kind of, looking at the sizing aspects for sewer systems. I would have that, as again, additional talking points, but I don't know if I want to jump out to a motion and approval of which route we go to until we really get all the cards on the table. I think that's probably wise, just because if there was some other language that came out from the model ordinance, maybe we would want to latch onto that instead. We talked again about educational opportunities. I do want to have that as a future agenda item. If we can implement some other type, I don't know if it would necessarily be as regulations, but as to recommendations as far as, hey, TRH owner, we'd really like you to have this additional documentation sheet in your facility so that individuals have more education, from renting, from what can go down a drain to what not to put in the lake, like don't go and shower in the lake. Just simple educational tools that we can use. I do think that would be a good future agenda item. We talked a little bit about it last month as far as the resort definition. And I know the vice chair and myself have kind of talked about it as well. I do think that this committee, as we work through these TRH aspects, it would help me through a zoning perspective to have a working knowledge and a working definition of a resort. So I would like to task this committee, with helping me develop that as well. And the reason it mainly comes up is when we look at these TRHs, we're now starting to see a trend of multiple TRHs in one location, where they may be on separate lots, but that they own 3 separate pieces of property, but they're renting each 3 separate units out. Do they codify and constitute as a resort? So I do want to have that as a future agenda item. And then we talked about timelines of enforcement. I think I would probably hold off on looking at timelines, at least at this point, until we saw some of the model ordinance and made, further motions on, which way we want to go. But at the end, we'll still need to look at timelines as to enacting these. And, does that come with, a 1 strike, 2 strike, 3 strike, revocation of license? Does it come with educational this year, slap on the wrist, friendly reminders, and now we start, citation processes? So that's probably more than just next month's agenda, but as a future agenda item to keep in mind. I do like one of the other individuals that said, I think it was Amy that was on there. And Amy, if you want to contact me and we can CC the chair on that, if you want to come with a short presentation about how they benefit the community, I think that would be pertinent as well.
Okay. As far as the model ordinance goes, I'm not sure that we need to wait for that. And the reason is, I think we've got some things that may actually help contribute to that model ordinance if we can, put based on the what we agreed to, our scope would be that, the county owns zoning, environmental health, health and human services, the land records piece of it, and then, overall education. I'd like to stick within that as the framework.
Rebecca is it possible to get a rough draft, not the final version? Because the final version is usually get everything cut out of them. So I was interested.
Yeah, actually, that comment is a great one because I have a meeting with Andy at noon on some WCA issues, and I have a big note to myself to talk with him about the model ordinance and how much we can, or how much I can share with this committee at this point in time, because I would like to get you a draft as soon as possible. The other point I want to talk with him about, and this is obviously a question for WCA, is whether they want to look at the sizing as part of that model ordinance. I like that option if, obviously it's a policy decision. If the committee or any county wants to go in that direction, I think it is a legitimate legal option. So I want to bring that to Andy and to WCA and see what their thoughts are on perhaps incorporating that into the model ordinance. So, because again, I think it's a great idea, and I give county staff a lot of kudos for coming up with that. Because again, it's thinking outside the box, but it's legitimate, and based on these preliminary discussions, it's legal. So it may be something that WCA wants to incorporate. To answer your specific question, I'm going to talk with Andy, and I will figure out the timeline on getting a draft of that model ordinance to the committee.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Would it be possible to get a copy of the ordinance that was passed several years ago and why it was rescinded a month later? Just so we have something to look at.
It was on the advice of legal counsel.
I know,
Not
but we
legal
know what-
document at the time. So
Right, but I mean, it was passed by
do
the
have it.
county.
I
know.
do have it, yes.
Okay, but I think it would be good for us to look at that because we can see that we might know what we're going to avoid in the next round that we're on right now.
That's the big bucks.
That's the big bucks up there. Okay.
Yeah, I can send out a copy of the previous ordinance. From my recollection, it was, yes, passed at the county in discussions with Mr. Tom Hoff, previous county administrator, and legal counsel at the time, Tom Duffy. Tom Duffy Jr. Did not feel that it was enforceable. And furthermore, it never went to the towns and it became as part of a zoning ordinance. So therefore, it actually had to go back to the towns. At that point, the recommendation was to rescind as opposed to not move forward with it.
I think it would be interesting just to have it to read, to know where we've been.
Can you distribute that to the committee prior to the next meeting? Okay, thank you. All right. Anything else for future agenda items? Okay.
Brian's on there. I'll work with Brian. We'll kind of have some potential examples of some of these road maintenance agreements. I don't know if I want to get too involved with those because that's more of kind of like attorneys stuff, but I think it's good to bring some of those examples because that could be another hot button item. And it's certainly one that we're already hearing is, yeah, you're at that dead end road on a private road easement and you're a TRH and you have other individuals that land you're going over as part of that easement saying you shouldn't be able to cross my land because it's for that owner of the property and not you as a renter of the property.
Right. And I kind of, yeah, it's in the hands of the attorneys, which also means it's not in our hands, which means, we can follow up with it when everything's all said and done and all of the legwork can be done by someone else and not necessarily the county.
Okay. Future meeting date, looks like we're looking at Thursday, August 31st at 10 a.m. Everybody good with that? All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.